Oh, hi, and welcome back to Devil's Advocate. I'm Tracy McLean Lowe, and this is.
I'm Milana. Hey guys, welcome back to our Devil's Advocate channel, which we've actually just started up again, really, as of late,
Well,
because
look,
we were doing tea
we
interviews
thought
for
it
a
was a
while.
year, but I've been through so much in the last 3 months. We did something in April as well about homelessness, here in
There you go.
Toronto.
So it's been a few
Um,
months.
well,
Yeah.
no, then we did this Indigenous histories last week, so we're trying to keep on a roll
Yes.
here,
Yes,
and make
that's
sure
true.
we actually know where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah.
It seems
And
like the year has just disappeared past us. Seriously, I
yeah.
don't know what the hell happened. Anywho, let's get on with where we were at the last episode in part two. We were talking about, or we mentioned Pocahontas.
Yes, we did.
There she is, both the Disney version and what we would imagine was the real version. There are various different pictures I found of her, but you've got a story to tell about that, haven't you, Alana?
Yes. Trace and I were just sort of discussing. Well, I was sort of discussing to Trace, if you will, how naive I was growing up with the Pocahontas Disney film. And the thing is, Disney glamorizes and Disney makes everything look pretty, puts in the singing birds and the bees and the beautiful women, princesses, and makes it very romantic. When in reality, Pocahontas, if you will, was the first missing Indigenous woman or someone who was converted to Christianity. Not, I don't know if it was against her will, but she was certainly encouraged to take up Christianity, and go to England and sort of ditch her native roots, if you will. And we don't really know what she endured. And at the end of the day, she was a child. I think she was like around, I think when she got married, what I was reading into, I think it was at about 17 that she got married.
Yeah.
So thinking about that, her life leading up to the proposal, the marriage, she must have been like 15, maybe even younger. You just don't know. And again, this is just something that I read, so dates specific, but yeah, I think it was around 17 that she got married to a tobacco farmer in England, and then that's when she went on her journey to develop being a Christian and all that jazz. And it's the way that Disney has made it seem is that she fell in love and she got married and she birthed beautiful babes and she had her father's blessing, when that's just not the
Mm.
case. We don't know what she endured as an Indigenous woman, being one of the first to travel to England.
What
And
was the most disturbing thing, though, that you read about that in that story?
oh yes, and I was speaking to Trace about this, and it made me so angry, so angry. They dubbed her as the civilized savage, and that just made me go ugh. It's just like a big ick. The civilized savage. So not even a woman. She doesn't even get a name. Savage. And even then, in Disney, and some people will argue this because there's a song in the Disney film, and it says savages, savages, barely even human, savages, savages. So even
Really?
Disney.
I mean, you got to remember, I actually haven't seen the Pocahontas movie. I think when it came out, I was an
Oh,
adult and I had a son, and it wasn't the kind of thing you took your son. Oh, you want to
yeah,
see the
come
Pocahontas?
on,
No, I don't
son.
want to see
Time for
princesses.
some Pocahontas. Yeah, there's some beautiful songs in it that are true to the sort of way that natives think. Like there's like the beautiful oak tree and talking about spirituality and that we're all our ancestors that were all connected. So yes, that part's true. But then there was that kind of like a little bit racist thing, like savages, savages, and I'm like, they're making this into a catchy song when it's like a derogatory
Yeah,
term
some
to
of my
call.
favorite songs are the worst words.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like but that's been dubbed on the indigenous people is to call them savages. So there
I
you go.
know,
So
I
but
know.
then in that song, you've also got the indigenous peoples singing it to the quote white man. So they're singing it like savages, savages, talking about their guns and their powder, whereas they're
Mm,
doing it savages, savages to the indigenous people. So it's like,
mm,
from both
yeah.
perspectives. But yes,
Yeah,
it's
it's a kind of
interesting.
perspective. Who exactly is the savage? One that's trying to blow your head off and
Exactly.
kidnap you and take you away from
Exactly.
your family, or you because you want to live where you
Exactly.
are.
Yeah. So yes, and then I can't remember when Pocahontas actually died. But when I was reading into this, I think she was just sort of faced with diseases because they were living in like a very off-cut area, coming from a tribe or coming from like a rural area, wherever she was from. I can't remember the name. Can't pronounce the name of the tribe. But then she went to Britain, and then she was faced with all of these diseases that they're not used to, and that's how she passed. So it's very
Yeah,
sad ending
yeah. I
indeed.
mean, you got to remember millions were killed off in smallpox when they sent a bunch of blankets over, infected
That's
with it
it.
allegedly,
That's
apparently.
it.
You
Yeah,
know, so
apparently. Yeah.
yeah, and this is histories that, you know, granted that Canada's got at the moment a Truth and Reconciliation Commission going about these things.
Yeah.
Um, but what you can very see the Republicans down south of our border are just not interested in,
Yes.
whether it's the slaves that got to stay there and that they were enslaved once before, or whether it's the Indigenous First Nations, African Americans. I did read there, though, that to use the term Indian, it seems to still be very common, despite the fact that Columbus was so wrong about where he landed.
Oh yeah. See, that's literally where it came from because Christopher Columbus he thought he was in India. So he called them
Exactly,
Indians.
exactly.
So that's and it's funny actually because with that's still what we're called, but I prefer to just call myself Native American or Native or Aboriginal. Um Anishinaabe, I can't even pronounce it myself.
Anishinaabe,
Yeah, there you
Anishinaabe,
go. Trace
Anishinaabe,
can
and
yeah,
Ojibwe.
yeah, exactly. See, Trace can pronounce it better than me. But yeah, like that's it. It's just like, we still get dubbed Indian, and it's like, well, no, that's a completely different group of people from
Yeah.
India. We're not Indian, you
And
know.
then going on from that, you take a look at her as probably, as you said, the first missing person. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got 215 graves found at Kamloops. I think that's in British Columbia. If I don't know my Canadian geography very well, but they had residential schools and stuff right around Canada. Although Canada had less granted than America, and they were
Yeah.
the first ones to initiate this. Apparently, it was an American
Yeah.
concept.
It
America
just
really
yeah.
existed at that time.
It just makes me feel so sick because like these kids were literally buried in the ground and in the walls and that's I don't know if they were trying to like cover up their past or whatever, but they didn't see them as human. They saw
No,
them as like this project,
and
beat the native out of them.
they
Yeah.
were taken away from their families. What do they call them now when they say whitewashing? They
Yeah,
were trying
what
to
is
whitewash their color
yes. Yeah,
too dark.
exactly.
But Lord forbid when they suddenly blended with their own races, then they had some other issue.
Yeah.
In South Africa with the colored people for the what they call coloreds, Cape Coloreds in South Africa.
There
The
you go.
moment they suddenly blended, that's not good enough either.
Exactly. And thinking about these, I mean, my grandmother went to residential school, and sometimes I wish that if there was a way that I could like have a telephone to connect to the spirit world or connect to whether she is and interview her, I would, because I have no idea what my grandmother endured. I've heard stories that like with the Indigenous children, they do stuff like just cut their hair and they'd like prank them, like even the like nuns would like just take their clothing and like steal their shoes and stuff, like in the winter, just to like troll them. I don't know why. I don't know what that constitutes to anything, but they
I
do
have
this to
no
kids.
idea.
Yeah,
I have to think that these people in some of the people were either just vindictive, cruel, and nasty, and went into that because they had a contained space
yeah,
full of
yeah.
victims. I don't know if you can hear that phone ringing in the background.
I can't hear anything.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope it goes away soon.
Imagine.
Um, yeah, what were we saying there now? So, yeah, I mean, you take a look, if they're in the ground, they've been stolen from their parents or been dragged off from their parents to these residential schools. Um, and there was something dreadful. It was called the 60s push.
Oh, the 60s scoop.
60s scoop. Sorry, thank you. My bad.
No, no, but that's a very good point, and it's interesting that you mentioned that because I almost did a film with the 60 skit where I was in playing an Indigenous mother, and I don't know what happened. Something happened to filming, and we didn't go through with it in the end. But it was such a beautiful moment because we actually had the native mother of the two native children that were starring in the film there. She was just sitting there chilling on set, and she actually taught me how to pronounce certain words as if I was on the res. I was the actor that was going to be playing the mother, and the actual mother was there. It was this really beautiful moment where we were just sitting on a picnic blanket, and they were like doing scenes with the children, like playing in the dirt, being kids. And she was like, pronounce it like this way, because that's how we would traditionally say, like, come here, or like go play, or this is what we call the way that we eat something. So I was actually having a beautiful lesson with this mother because she really wanted, and I really wanted to portray it as to a T as much as possible. And I really wanted to bring the realism of the character. And she was sitting there just teaching me. And it was really sad that it was very emotional, the scene, because the scene would be me playing as a mother just at our residential house on the reserve. I don't know why I said that. Our house on the reserve. Sorry, words. And then the children are just playing, and then what happens is that the authorities come and just scoop up the kids. That's literally what happened. They'd just be playing outside, and they'd literally pull through. Just yoink.
Yeah.
Just take them. Just
Yeah.
take them. No warning.
Yeah.
Just yoink. Bye. Bye, mum. Never see you. Who knows when? And it was very sad.
I started watching a documentary on YouTube, and I think my biggest problem is because listening to the stories, it's almost heart-wrenching. This one woman I was listening to was saying how she'd been dragged off to a residential school, and the parents were allowed to come and visit them. But I don't think they were allowed on the property, and they just said, your mother's here, and she went running out to meet her mom, and she was in tears. She said she was petrified to get off the step to go down and see her mother, but eventually she ran down to be with her mom, and she just cried the whole time her mom was there. And it's like 10 minutes or less, and you're jerked away back from your mother or parent again, back into
Yeah.
the sort of like jail system with these horrible, abusive people.
Yeah. Basically. Yeah.
You
And
know?
that's exactly what it
And I
was. It was
mean,
like the system
very
in order.
rarely you'd probably find one nice person who eventually got thrown out by everybody else because and even if there was one nice person, what could they do to help? Or you'd think there was one nice person, and suddenly you'd find out there was you jumped from the fire into the frying pan, or the frying pan into the fire, should I say?
Exactly. And it's so sad because that maybe there was a child that thought maybe I'm going somewhere better where I'm gonna have like a nice, because in the reserves, even till this day, they're kind of shabby and worn down because the government just don't really care to maintain them. So maybe at
Well,
some point these kids were like, maybe I
that's
am
an,
going somewhere nice.
that's another thing, and I'm going to stop us here because I'm not quite sure whether how long we've got,
Oh yes,
how
yes.
long we've actually got to put these things up. I might get lucky. I might get a few extra minutes this time, but there we go. We'll stop for now, and we'll be back with our next little bit shortly.
We'll be back.
Or
Stay
we'll be back
tuned.
one way or another. Stay tuned. Go. And we're back. And while this might look a little weird, we're back in South Africa. There is a reason for this. We ended on
Yeah,
the conversation of reservations here in Canada.
yeah,
And how it got to that particular state, and that's about the monarchy and them eventually putting them. They had their treaties on their tribal land, and then they ended up with the government using some of the land, messing around with it when they weren't supposed to. They were put onto reservations, but they weren't given Canadian citizenship, and this was under what they called the Indian Acts. So they
hmm
kept the whole concept of Columbus and his daft ideas. So we've got a lot of those. If you take a
yes,
look, I did find a map, and for whatever reason, it disappeared off my pages. We've got about 11 tribal territories across Canada. And the
yeah,
whole deal with them is the deal with the Canadian government is they got all the land that wasn't occupied by the British or the French. So everything west of like wherever they originally started off in Montreal somewhere, that could belong to the First Nations. And there's a few bits and pieces where obviously we were already there or something like that. And they could
yeah,
have all of that. But again, they've reduced it. So Toronto, instead of being a natural lush area, that was taken over. I think that's Mississauga land. And and it's not just there, it's in all the provinces right across. Um, and where they did something similar in South Africa with the Bantu Act, which got all the homelands, and we've got KwaZulu-Natal, they're not all mentioned here. There's Transkei, there's Mpumalanga, there's Botswana, there's Mokopane and Polokwane. I'm not quite sure if those are cities in Venderland, and there's Venderland, and there's other ones all around.
Yeah,
Um, Vendors at the top north near the Limpopo River in Zimbabwe.
yeah,
But yeah, they did the same thing. They made the people move to these places and said, right, you can be here. This is your land. They weren't countries that were recognized by the rest of the world. They were
right.
within the confines and under the protectorate of South Africa, but they couldn't be called South African citizens, just like First Nations couldn't be called Canadian citizens.
Yes, yeah,
There was limited trade between the two. Everything was shrunk down, and when they stole their land, they took more and more of the land. They took more of the traditional hunting lands. I mean,
yeah,
where they
yeah.
hunted for their food. You
It's
know,
just
yeah,
so,
there was the hunting
yeah.
there is for fooding and clothing. It's not to put heads on walls. So, oh, look at me, I'm a big brave alpha man.
It's just so horrid, isn't it? And that, even with the South African, tribes people you're speaking of, they would be referred to as Aboriginal as well, like the original people. And
That
that's where
is
this whole,
correct.
yeah, and like this is where this whole sort of that whole name stems from is Aboriginal. They were original to that country. And then you've got these people who swoon in, claim this land, be like, well, you can go live over there now in that little
Yeah,
patch.
you can
Oh,
have
and
that.
by the way,
You can have
yeah.
none of it up there.
Exactly. Oh, and
Because
by the
apparently
way, yeah.
The Inuit were not given the same kind of deal either. That
Ah,
that
that's
is also
interesting.
it's not the same as all the other First Nations that got there. That's a whole other deal altogether.
I
Uh,
follow this Inuit girl on TikTok, and she's often sort of exposing her life and how she lives it, and she still very lives it in her traditional um in a traditional way. And the amount of slander that she gets for just being her culture is just so upsetting. Even the
yeah,
food that she
well,
eats, and
it's the
and it's
same with some of the Bantu. I mean, a lot of them came to work in the cities because there was no other way.
yeah,
The homelands that they were given were on scrap land that wasn't good for farming or anything like that. So it was just useless land they were given.
yeah, yeah,
Um, there was no facilities for hunting. Whatever happened, the Boer
yeah,
and the English and the French and the yada yada all come along, and everybody got a little nuts and taken over. So their hunting land was limited. I think there's
yeah,
only one natural group of people, natural original Aboriginal people in Africa now, who still do hunting in the traditional way, and that's the who they call the Bushmen or the Khoisan
yeah.
up
Oh, that's
in Bosmanland.
interesting. Yeah, and that's kind of beautiful that they're still able to have those traditions and still able to hunt in their land because, as you just mentioned earlier, they even took away their hunting grounds for
Well,
food.
yeah, exactly. I mean, the elephants that used to traverse across the plains of southern Africa can't
Yeah.
even travel like they used to travel, you know.
Wow. Yeah.
So everybody's been squished
Yeah.
in into a little spot just so that a bunch of other people can have all the space and do nothing, very little with it. Yeah, granted, they do farming and they do
Sliced,
do a lot
diced,
with
and
it, but at the same
divided.
time, they ruined it for everybody else. And I think that's the thing, though. I mean, you talk about them saying in the U when she landed in the UK, there's stories from or tales, and it's real, where they would take people from Africa and put them in human zoos in London.
Oh my
You
gosh.
know, oh look, like and look at this. I mean, but these were the same people that they were expecting to work in their homes, do their housework,
Wow.
do their gardening, farm their land,
Yeah.
but this is what they come up with. You know,
Beware of
uh, or or
natives.
or
Yeah.
or this with a seat exactly down the road a little bit that says this, whites only. I mean,
Gosh, it's just so derogatory, isn't it? Like
it
they don't even
is,
get a name. It's just white people only. Like just awful.
I
It's like
know.
dehumanizing. It's almost like you're not human anymore. Like
Well,
that's your skin color. That's what you are. You're just not human. white people only. You go
But,
over back to your little lily pad and sit on there away from me, you know?
but
It's
here
just,
is the tragic truth to this. When the Dutch and the Boer went inland from the Cape, they
yeah,
went in seeking their New Jerusalem. Bunch of religious nuts. And I don't have religion, it's about faith. And if you're going to believe the book, what a book tells you, it tells you your New Jerusalem isn't anywhere. There
yeah,
is no New Jerusalem. You've just come in, taken over somebody's country, and used your religion as an excuse to do so.
yeah,
Okay. They
yeah,
did the same in the Americans when the Puritans arrived there, on the Mayflower.
yeah,
They arrive on the Mayflower in Jamestown and they're all about their religion and how wonderful and nice they are. And we have found our New Jerusalem or we've found our Zion. You're thinking, yeah, really? No, 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 no,
yeah,
no.
yeah.
This is not the way it goes. And I've
Well,
been
that's
told
it,
that for some
right?
reason we're running out of time, whatever that is. I don't know how many minutes we've got left. Oh, have a few. But
Yes.
it's just I mean, I studied psychology and I don't even get it.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, I'm even in the process of trying to learn a little bit more about religion, and I'm talking about what's in the book and just trying, not to be involved in a religion, but to understand
yes,
what was said. I mean, I've read bits, I was raised a certain way, but
yeah,
you know, to know it and to understand that and then have faith and then so like I believe in my Bible and treat people this like this and that they've all
yeah.
got to follow you like you're Jesus Christ. Yeah.
Exactly.
And it gets wonky. It gets
It
very
does.
wonky.
It really does get wonky. And, and that's the thing. We're still seeing this even up until today with, missing people. I'm sure even in South Africa, missing people over here in Canada as well. The Indigenous communities have always been looked at less than, even
Yeah.
in today's society. And it's just so awful that we still live in this sort of period where, white people have put themselves over top and then anything is below that. Maybe not all the time, but for the most part, that's generally what we see, you
Well, the
know?
way I look at it, well, in 1947, whoever was in charge back then in South Africa turned around and made formalized its apartheid.
Yeah,
In Canada, you had more of a, well, it's not there kind of thing, our
yeah,
apartheid. They're not there, so it's not there.
yeah,
You take a look even, with the Aboriginals in Australia, you know, they're just the Aborigines. It was the same with them.
yeah,
They now do have some kind of truth reconciliation, and they are returning lands and stuff to them. So there are things happening there. The Maoris again are very different. Um,
yeah,
but and I think possibly, if I take a look at perhaps our Bushmen or our Khoisan in South Africa or Southern Africa. They're a very quiet bunch. They're not a very violent bunch. Unlike that island somewhere in the South Seas of, I'm not quite sure which ocean right now, where they are still sort of like they don't want us there. Anybody who's
yeah,
white or looks like me, for example, would die in a heartbeat. Whereas the Bushman tribe or the First Nations tribe, or even the Zulu nations, they would take you in. They
they
didn't
would. Yeah,
necessarily kill you on sight.
yes,
They were
yes,
quite happy to meet up with people. This wasn't sort of like, oh, you're different to me, so I'm going to kill you. The
yes.
killing
It
came
was,
afterwards. I mean, there's a
yeah,
time when the French and the Africans and the Zulus they fought together against the British, or when the Boer and the Africans fought against the British. There
yes,
all these times when they could come together and do something, and then you've got something in 1947. Because even after the Boer War, people like Mandela could still go and study. There was universities for them. It was still sort of like a little bit separate, but it wasn't with signage everywhere.
yeah,
It was a more subtle sort of like, but I think it would have become a little bit more like the UK by that stage of the game, had they allowed it to go through.
yeah,
Because while even with the police, and we've got some racist police across the world, doesn't matter where you go, um, the racism towards specifically someone meters like yourself in the UK, you'd pass as white.
Yes.
You wouldn't,
Yes.
and you don't, and even somebody from Jamaica or something, not necessarily passing as white, but it's a little easier than it would be in the USA, for example. You just get
Yes.
shot for being walking while black. But
Yeah.
we take a look at the First Nations in our own country, and right now at this moment, our biggest issue is missing people in general, but at the same time, comparatively speaking, more First Nations, Indigenous people, especially women, go
Yes.
missing and end up dead more often.
There was a statistic, something, I think I said this to Trace earlier before we started filming this. There was a statistic maybe a few years ago. The statistics are probably higher now, but I actually saw something, and they were doing a missing and murdered Indigenous women performance, which is really beautiful. And the writing came on the screen while they were dancing and doing this beautiful powwow. And the statistic was Indigenous women are 7 times more likely to be abducted, go missing, and murdered than white, Hispanic, black here in Canada. And that's just staggering to think about. And, it's almost like they just don't care. They don't draw any attention to that whatsoever.
Mm,
Or they do their one little day where they're like, yeah, we celebrate this, and then it's forgotten about. And
mm.
then it's almost like, what, we put on our orange shirts or our red shirts, we've drawn attention to it for one day, and then we don't really need to think about it. We've done our part. And it's like an ongoing thing that keeps getting worse and worse, and it's still very prevalent to this day of people going missing and murdered, and they just don't give it enough thought and attention. And
Well,
unfortunately that's just the way it is.
what I found really annoying though, and this is specifically the way whoever planned it this way is a little insensitive, is
Mm-hmm.
we have Indigenous month here in June, but it's also the
Yes.
LGBTQ month. And LGBTQ stuff just overtook the entire Indigenous month. And that should
Yes.
not be allowed. I'm sorry. They're
Yes.
allowed their stuff, but
Yes.
you can't try and identify two unique sectors. I mean, granted,
Mm-hmm.
a few may be gay and, a few may be Indigenous on the either side, but
Yeah.
that's too unique on their own,
Yes,
you
I
know?
agree with you, actually. I agree with you.
And if you can do a Black History Month for a whole month with it
Yeah.
only being about Black history, then why can't we only do an Indigenous month?
Yes. Yes,
That kind of thing
exactly.
is more difficult in Africa or South Africa where you've got a Black government.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
if they want to teach Black history, they've got to push it out into the schools there. I mean, we learned
Yeah.
a little bit in our general history, but there's a bunch of Black history off nobody knows anymore. And
Yes.
there's a bunch
Yeah.
of traditions that they still practice that are deadly,
Yeah.
you know. So it's a case of where do they blend? How do we come together so that we can actually celebrate them properly?
Exactly. And I think you're absolutely right. Even as someone who identifies as being part of the LGBTQ community plus, whatever you want to call it now, and Indigenous, I completely agree with you because that's two separate things that should have their own time and their own spotlight.
Yeah.
Because then it gets all jumbled about and discombobulated, like
Yeah, if that
you
means
know,
that we have Indigenous months in August, then so be it.
yes. Yeah, and I
You
think
know,
you're absolutely
or if
right.
we
I
have
think, yeah,
LGBTQ month in August, then so be it. Don't try
yeah,
and rush everything so that it's all done and dusted by the summer holidays are coming along.
exactly. I
This
totally
is
agree
stuff
with
people
you.
should be doing in the summer holidays.
Because we live in a world where we're a lot more accepting of the LGBTQ plus anyway, that it begs the question, well, why can't we draw more focus onto the indigenous peoples
Yeah.
and learn and cultivate and go back to the roots and go back to the residential schools? Why can't we focus on that for a
Yeah.
little
I
while?
mean, I was
What's the
talking to
problem with
some
focusing on that?
I
Yeah.
was talking to someone else who said the only First Nations they learned about was the Iroquois and another tribe because they had helped respectively the British at one time or the French at one time or both.
Yeah.
There was another tribe as well, but I don't remember the name she mentioned. So they were mentioned within the Canadian history, but beyond that, nothing was mentioned. And we've got a timing limit here. So
Oh, yes.
I think with this particular point, I should say we are devil's advocate. Ha, zero, goodbye for me for a
Yeah.
second. And please do like and subscribe
And share.
and share, and we will be back.
We
Uh,
shall see you next time, guys, with our
yeah, to
next Devil's
continue this
Advocate.
conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, and goodbye from
Goodbye.
us.
Au revoir.
Oh, that's it. We're up. We've got 1 minute left.
Are you still recording? I feel like you are.
No, I finished recording.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, good. I was